Money talks, BS walks. We've all heard that phrase and used it any number of ways. And one of the things that always seems to come around to is that anybody who has the cash gets listened to. If you don't have money, you're going to be waiting in line for a long time if you ever get anywhere at all. That, unfortunately, is not supposed to apply to American foreign policy. Unfortunately, though, it is what it is. And that does apply here in this situation with the U.S. trying to give away all of our money to Ukraine. Now, you've heard us talk a bunch of times about the fact that Ukraine can't win. We're going to get into that in just a second. But I want to strip away some of the fiction here, because a lot of people hear all this stuff about money to Ukraine, and they hear lots of flowery words about what it's supposed to mean and how important it is. But let's actually take a look underneath the curtain. But first of all, this perfectly illustrates this video here that was by the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer after the Senate had passed a bipartisan bill that wanted to give $95 billion to a bunch of different countries, $60 billion of which was going to go to Ukraine. Notice the flowery language and the soaring rhetoric he uses to justify it.
Today, after not just a long night and weekend, but after months of work, we can say it's been worth it. Today we witnessed one of the most historic and consequential bills passed the Senate, a bill that so greatly impacts not just our national security, not just the security of our allies, but also the security of Western democracy as we know it. But if the hard right kills this bill, it would be an enormous gift to Vladimir Putin. It would be a betrayal of our partners and allies and an abandonment of our service members.
Okay, so in case you missed all that, it would be, if we don't give all of our money to Ukraine, it would be a betrayal, really horrible thing of our allies and friends. It would be a gift to Vladimir Putin. And we need it for democracy as we know it and for American national security. He'll just throw that one in just in case any of those others didn't fly. So all of these big emotional tags to make you think that, holy cow, it is really important that we send this money to Ukraine. But folks, it's not. Earlier this afternoon, we had Doug McGregor on where we were talking about some of these issues there. And in terms of the tactical situation, we asked him, is this something really that's going to help Ukraine win? What do you think?
Of course, Ukraine can win. Of course, Ukraine has already succeeded militarily in one of the most profound objectives it had, which was to keep the country from falling into Russian hands.
Is he right? Is it a matter of tools? Just darn it, if only Ukraine had the tools, and this package will put those tools in there. If we give them those tools, is that going to change the reality on the ground?
And no, he's lying. You know, this is just another lie in a series of lies and fiction that we've been hearing now for the last couple of years.
And if you think, okay, well, yeah, we know that McGregor doesn't really agree with with a lot of these things that we're doing, so that's just his opinion. No, folks, it's not his opinion. It's objective reality. One of the things that we live by here on this channel, you hear me say it a lot, ground truth reality. What is the truth on the ground? Not what anybody says, not what anybody wants, but what's actually true. Here is a picture of the current battle situation and one of the key parts of the front published today by the Institute for the Study of War. Even though they're big supporters of lots of money for Ukraine, they still do publish an accurate representation of what's going on in the line. This is one of the key areas there in the Donetsk area. And you see all of these areas in the green there, which is where Russia is attacking. You see all the areas of orange, which is a territory that Russia has recently taken. Every single map on the ISW site where it zeroes in on all the fights that are going on, every one of them show Russia moving forward. In no place do you see Ukraine pushing forward. In fact, there are very few places where Ukraine's even holding the line. And that's probably more a product of the fact that Ukraine doesn't have the ability to go on offense, and that the Russians in some areas are just holding the line. They're not trying, so that they can focus in at least 5 other areas. All the areas Russia's moving forward with. The risk is that over the next few months, Ukraine may actually buckle. And it doesn't matter if they get this money or not. That's really key to understanding here. You've been hearing me talk about this. If you've been watching my appearances on television for the last 2 years, or the articles that I've been writing, or certainly since we've been doing this show since last September, you've been hearing me say Ukraine has no path to military victory, and you see it graphically played out on the ground every day. Every day you see more and more physical evidence that Ukraine cannot win, and it doesn't matter how many more planes, tanks, or bombs you send them. They don't have the manpower to go up against Russia, which has a lot more manpower, and they don't have the industrial capacity to even match what the Russia has, much less ever overcome it. They didn't do it last summer when they had every opportunity and every advantage that they're ever going to get. They didn't even dent the line, and now even the dents have been lost. And now, like I said, the chances of them actually crumbling and their forces falling apart and Russia having large-scale gains is much higher than even the possibility of a stalemate forming, or that the lines would continue on here. That's the objective truth, and that's the truth of it. So then you have to ask, if that be the case, why would so many in the United States want to just give all of our money away? And like Schumer there, use all this flourishing rhetoric and saying that all these dangerous things will happen if we don't give the money. Why do they do that? Well, folks, it really is about the money. If you're not ever talking about a crime, you always look, who benefited from this? Who's gaining from this material anytime a crime was committed here? And you hear us say this, people say it's about money. I'm going to show you just a handful of examples here about what people are saying about money, and you'll see it's not a small list. First of all, we'll talk about on the Jon Stewart show just a few days ago. They had the I believe it was the editor of The Economist magazine giving voice to something that lots of people on this side say.
To be clear, aiding Ukraine, giving the money to Ukraine, is the cheapest possible way for the U.S. to enhance its security. The fighting is being done by the Ukrainians. They're the people who are being killed. The U.S. and Europe are supplying them weapons. And in doing so, we are pushing back against Putin.
We're pushing back against Putin. She even out loud says it. The Ukraine people are the ones who are being killed, and celebrating as though that's a good thing. It's cool that they're dying because it pushes back Putin. Folks, look, it doesn't matter whether you push back Putin or not. This war will be over soon enough, and all the capacity that Russia is building right now will still be there. It'll be stronger. Whether you push them back now, whether you push them back another few months, or whether you negotiate an end tomorrow, that's not going to change that outcome. But what is going to be permanent is the loss of all of these Ukrainian men who keep dying in the hundreds by the day. That by itself is immoral. And the fact that a lot of people agree with that, that might almost be enough. Unfortunately, it's not enough, and the list continues on. Now, in the news today, Mitch McConnell has been all over the news because he's announced his resignation from the House or the Senate leadership, but he's been one of the most egregious violators of this, as he said in this recent interview.
If you look at the Ukraine assistance, let's talk about where the money is really going. A significant portion of it's being spent in the United States, in 38 different states, replacing the weapons that we sent to Ukraine with more modern weapons. So we're rebuilding our industrial base.
That's what President Biden's seeking to do.
It's correct. No Americans are getting killed in Ukraine. We're rebuilding our industrial base. The Ukrainians are destroying the army of one of our biggest rivals. I have a hard time finding anything wrong with that.
I believe him when he says that. I don't see what's even wrong with this. What's wrong with a bunch of Ukrainian people dying? They're not voters in my district. And if it, revitalizes our military industrial capacity, what's wrong with that? That's the problem. He doesn't see anything wrong with it. He doesn't think, look, we don't need a war somewhere else if we want to revitalize our industrial capacity. That's a decision that can be made any day. And you can allocate money to do that if you so desire, if you think that that's in America's national interest, and the people that do vote for you can be convinced of it, that's fine. You don't need a war to go on to do that. That's the absurdity of what he's talking about here. But he is celebrating all this money that's coming in. And I bet some of that's in his state if you actually dig underneath it. But certainly many of his backers, I can assure you that's the case. But he actually said that one of the few times that you'll hear a Republican loud the president of the United States is when it has to do with cash. And he's right, because here's the president's view on that same topic.
I want to be clear about something, because I know it's important to the American people. While this bill sends military equipment to Ukraine, it spends the money right here in the United States of America, places like Arizona, where the Patriot missiles are built, and Alabama, where the Javelin missiles are built, and Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Texas, where artillery shells are made.
U.S. State Department for President Biden is supposed to be the organization that seeks a negotiated settlement, that seeks diplomacy, that tries to solve problems at the lowest possible level, at the lowest possible cost, at the greatest benefit to America. That's what they're supposed to do. But here is I believe it's the Deputy Secretary of State, Victoria Nuland, who's always been advocate for helping Ukraine kill Russians because she loves to do that. Here's how she views it.
This is not just about Ukraine. If we don't stop Putin in Ukraine, he will keep going. And autocrats and tyrants all around the world will take comfort and think that they too can chunk off a piece of their neighbor. And by the way, we have to remember that the bulk of this money is going right back into the U.S. economy to make those weapons, including good-paying jobs in some 40 states across the United States.
I remember when Gary first showed me that clip, because I hadn't seen it on my own there. Even he made this comment about how breathless she was about how, yay, all of this is going to be money for us too. Like she thinks that that's going to be influencing people. That's what we want to hear. Well, what is she going to think when she sees the president of the United States say it, and then her boss, the Secretary of State?
Virtually all of the security assistance that we've provided to Ukraine, that gets invested right here in the United States. That's where it's spent. This is a win-win for us.
It's a win-win. Hey, war is good for business, man, especially if it's not our people dying. And you've heard this whole list of people they're talking. These are at the highest levels. These are not some minor officials. These are not some random quotes that we pulled out of context. These are all directly in context. And you keep hearing them say over and over, like Victoria Nuland did a second ago. They, first of all, try to make it sound noble and necessary and, against this grave evil coming out of Russia, even though that they're not actually threatening our security and they never have been. They want to put it in those contexts because they typically think that'll move Americans to go ahead and support it. And then the troubling thing is that they think that, hey, if we just put it in a financial context and that you actually get some cash out of this, 2 thumbs up. Let's make that happen. But I don't think that that's actually the way most Americans think. I'm sure that there are some. There's clearly some that are motivated by that. But I think that there are a lot more moral Americans that care much more about doing what's right, that care much more about actually lowering the chances of war and genuinely defending our country, which this is not doing. And we're going to see why in a minute. It's a pretty graphic situation on that too, and it's much worse than you may think. And our leaders are playing a much more dangerous game by seeking the cash and going after the money. They're actually putting your security at risk. Not only they want to take your money, because by the way, let's make clear that we understand that this money that they're talking about isn't coming out of thin air. It's coming out of your pocket. And then it's going into the military industrial complex, which means it's only part of it's actually going to benefit Ukraine. The rest of it's going to benefit the people in the military industrial complex, not you, because our security is unchanged by this, but it helps them make more money. But that's not the bigger issue. To me, the bigger issue is the morality of it and the fact that it's putting our security at greater risk. So we kind of saw really kind of the curtains open back in December when Zelensky actually came to the United States and he wanted to try to convince Congress to cut loose some of this money. And there was this famous picture you may have seen where his most important meeting, all those people, I mean, this looks like a class reunion, right? I mean, if you don't know who any of these people are, you're looking at that. Everybody's really happy. It doesn't look like anybody's worried about war or anything. Zelensky's there in the middle. You know who these people are? These are all of the senior officials at all the biggest defense contractors who are hearing ka-ching in their ears. They love it. All of these bomb contracts, missiles, artillery shells, other kinds of equipment that is going to Ukraine, it's just money in their ears because they're making cash. Now, listen, to a certain extent, I don't blame them. They're businessmen. That's why they get into business, is to make money. And that's what they're doing. So in a certain extent, I don't blame them too much, but I do blame a lot the politicians who are wanting to put money in their pockets. And you see this Zelensky here in Munich a couple of days ago, or a week or so ago, where he was again meeting with all the U.S. Congress people this time who are trying to give him that money. And you see all the places, everything always comes down to the cash. Now, if this was a situation where I could say, look, the Ukraine side is right on the cusp of winning, and they were, invaded by the Russians, which they were. And if they just get a little bit more, this could make a difference. It can't. It's not going to. The war is already a done deal for reasons that I've specified before. And I'll repeat the main ones here. National combat power by countries is built on several things. It's built on their manpower pool. It's built on their industrial capacity, and it's done on the will of the people. And right now, all three of those categories overwhelmingly are in Russia's favor. They have millions more men through which they can throw into battle. So no matter what Ukraine does, they can never match what the Russians can throw in there. Military industrial capacity. Russia has their whole system just cranking out right now. Their economy is in positive territory despite all of the sanctions we put on them to try to crush it. Instead, it actually grew bigger than ours. In Russia, in Germany, there's actually contracted. It cost our ally Germany in a recession because of these sanctions. That's how effective what we're doing there. But hey, that's collateral damage to us, right? Our economy's not going down, and we are getting money for these other sections. We don't even hardly care how it affects our own allies. That's the unpleasant, ugly truth of this as well. But then you look at the political will. Ukraine certainly has plenty of political will. They were invaded, so they certainly have had enormous will so far to fight, and especially in the first part, they did so much heroic and tremendous fighting capacity. But that's starting to wane because they're getting so many people killed, and they're losing on the ground. The Russian side, on the other hand, has just as much political will. You may think that, that's not, they're fighting in a foreign war. People have tried to make the analogy between the U.S. and Vietnam and how we didn't want to fight that. Look, that was thousands of miles away. Most people didn't even know what Vietnam was. And it was this dumb war that had nothing to do with our national security. This is on Russia's border. This is that they are threatened every day by things like, Gary, I don't know if you've got this up, but that there's an exercise going on right now. About 90,000 troops, NATO troops, are operating on the border with Russia. And that's something that is an existential threat to the Russians. That's the reason they went to war against Ukraine in the first place. It's because NATO was threatening to go into Ukraine to get right up to their border. So you had a couple of days ago, the NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg reiterate again on the second anniversary of the war that Ukraine is still going to come into NATO. So even though Stoltenberg himself admitted some number of months back that Putin gave him an opportunity to avoid war before February 2022 by just saying that Ukraine was going to be neutral, that NATO was off the table. He said he refused. Then Putin said he made good on his threat. That's what Stoltenberg admitted, that the war started because of NATO advancement into Ukraine. So now then, 2 years later, Stoltenberg wants to reiterate that and say that, yes, we're still coming in. NATO is still going to go into Ukraine, giving Russia every incentive in the world to keep fighting. And then you have things like this NATO exercise that's going on right now on the border with Russia.
It's actually 90,000 NATO troops exercising together to prepare for various contingencies, most notably to prepare for any sort of Russian incursion on NATO territory. NATO allies have come together to reinforce and fortify the eastern flank. We're moving troops to the eastern flank. We're enhancing our deterrence and defense and sending a very strong signal to Russia that he should never consider touching NATO territory.
Yeah, they're sending a very strong message to Russia. And I can assure you, Russia is receiving a signal, only it's not the one that we want. If the intent is to make Russia back down, that was disabused. This is footage from today, literally hours ago, where Russia made a big public show of moving some of their nuclear missiles around in the public area. They made a point of making sure people can see this publicly. Those are nuclear tipped missiles. And what do you think that that's doing out right now to send their own message. And this was, and then I guess it was about 10 or so days ago, Vladimir Putin also, in response to the F-16s apparently getting ready to come in, started flying around in a Tu-160 nuclear-capable bomber to fly around in some of the areas where these things would actually be launched. Nuclear weapons. So is he getting the message? Yeah, he's getting a message. So all of this, by continuing to fight a war that can't be won, by continuing to throw cash and money at a certain sector, a very thin sector of American businesses, we are risking the possibility that this expands into a nuclear war. Now, it seems just mind-boggling that would even be possible. It's like, oh, that they're just posturing. Maybe they are, but Putin said unambiguously for 15 years prior to the onset of this war that he would be willing to use nuclear or military power to keep Ukraine out of NATO. Do we really want to gamble that even though he made good on that threat, that now then when he's talking about the potential for nuclear weapons, maybe he's not going to mean it this time? Do you want to risk our existence on hoping that he doesn't mean it this time when he did mean it the last time, on what he considers his threat, his nuclear, or his threat to his nation? Do we really want to do that? And why are we doing any of this stuff? It's because of money. You see it. All these officials at the highest levels keep saying over and over, it's about money. It's great. Ukraine people are being killed. Ours aren't being killed, but Russians being harmed. And that's cool that Russia's being pushed back. So we want to keep spending American money, your tax dollars, to keep poking Russia, even though we're not at war with Russia. There's no reason we should be at war with Russia. And if not for this war right here, there would be no threat that for America and Russia to have any kind of a conflict. There would be no possibility of a nuclear escalation. It wouldn't even be on the table. Now it's on the table. So you have Russia posturing here. Now you see that one with NATO. They're posturing higher. Folks, you hear all kinds of leaders in Western Europe talk over and over about World War III is just around the corner. Maybe within 3 to 5 years, we're and according to the British generals, we're in the pre-war period right now. We have to start getting ready. You have too many people mentally getting ready for conflict on both sides. This is insanity. This is absurd to the highest order. Why is anybody wanting to continue to go down and spend money to try and move us in a direction where the risk of nuclear war is higher and higher? It is absurd to the highest degree. And I assure you, well, if this ever happens, there probably won't be many of us around to lament it. But if there's even a limited nuclear exchange, I mean, these people, all of them throughout both sides of this should be strung up and put in jail because these actions have potential catastrophic consequences. This is no longer a minor deal. The whole issue with what we did with spending money in Afghanistan and supporting a war that was already over, and our unwillingness to be honest about it, but continuing to throw billions of dollars every year into a failed operation. That helped the defense industry there as well, too. They certainly benefited from all of those missiles and bombs we were dropping, and all the military gear we had was a payday for a couple of decades on them. It was great for them, horrible for the Afghan people, and embarrassing for us once it finally collapsed because reality imposed itself over the spin. Now, at that time, it was just an embarrassment. If this thing keeps going in this direction, it's going to be potentially, folks, this is no exaggeration, millions of people could die because of this, if this thing ends up in the worst outcome, in the worst possible scenario. And the fact that there's so few people who are even worried about that at the highest levels is deeply concerning. They should be the first ones to be real worried about this. You may not know this, but in 1956, the Soviet Union invaded Hungary, one of their satellite countries at that time. And there's a big hubbub in the Western world. And they said, why don't the United States do something about that? Why don't they stop the Soviet Union from going into Hungary? The Vice President of the United States then, Richard Nixon, said it's a terrible situation, but we're not going to risk World War III and nuclear catastrophe because of what happens over there. Now, that was bad for the people in Hungary at that time, and they suffered a lot underneath that. But it didn't turn into a big war because we didn't get involved. It didn't escalate into nuclear confrontation. It settled down, and of course, eventually Hungary became a free nation that it is today. That could have been the case for Ukraine here. We could have avoided that situation, and that war should never have been fought. You can watch some of our other videos to explain why that is, but it did. And so now we are where we are. The question now, today, is do we want this to go even further to where we have a catastrophe that just can't be walked back from, and it won't just be an embarrassment. It could be the literal destruction of our country as we know it. Or do we want to finally stop this insanity? And as voters, as just regular Americans, tell our leaders, shut up. Forget about cash. This is not about cash. This is about doing what's right for the people of Ukraine. It's about doing what's right for our national security. And it's about not escalating this to where nuclear war is even talked about. Folks, again, you saw those videos there. There are nuclear missiles rolling around publicly in Russia right now. Part of it is in response to the fact that we keep sending all these missiles, keep sending fighter jets to the Ukraine side that's going to kill Russians. They're getting tired of this. And now then they're making it clear that they're willing to contemplate the unthinkable. Let's don't put them in a position to do that. Let's lower this situation down, bring it back into some sort of sanity, and support those people who are looking at this right. At least some people are looking at it properly. We've had on our show before Senator Rand Paul, who was on our show, was pretty adamant about where this money should be going. And a couple of days ago, he said this:
"Open the champagne, pop the cork. The Senate Democrat leader and the Republican leader are on their way to Kiev. They've got $60 billion they're bringing. I don't know if it'll be cash and pallets, but they're taking your money to Kiev."
So he was obviously not real happy about that, the way he put that. And at the CPAC conference a couple of days ago, Senator J.D. Vance was a little more direct.
The way that these guys have obsessively focused on the problems of Ukraine to the exclusion of everything else that's going on in our country. I have seen colleagues of mine, even, Republican colleagues, who are much more emotionally invested in what's going on 6,000 miles away than they are in their own country. If the thing you care most about, we can agree to disagree on Ukraine. I imagine a lot of you agree with me, some of you don't. Yeah. But if the thing you care most about is a conflict 6,000 miles away, you should not be a leader of this country. Focus on our own country's problems.
Yeah, I can certainly agree with that. You shouldn't be thinking about something that's going over there that's not related to our national security. If Russia eventually wins that war there, as I've told you so many times, all this fiction that they're going to come after us, that they're going to go after the West, is just complete insanity. They don't have the capacity. Flat out, it doesn't matter what Putin wants to do. He can't. He doesn't have enough armor. He doesn't have enough personnel. He doesn't have enough equipment. He doesn't even have a logistics system that's capable of projecting power more than 180 miles past his border. That, which is on a map, when you look at Europe, it's just it's a line is almost that thick there, meaning he can't go in forward. So if you can't go all the way, then there's no point in starting. That means that this fear is irrational. He's not going to go into Western Europe. What we should do then, and this is where I want to end the show today, and telling you there is an alternative. It's not just don't give them the money. It's that let's do this instead. What we can do is say, you know what, we're going to taper back the money we provide, and it's only going to go for defensive purposes to help you hold the line that you have, so that, and it's contingent upon you seeking a negotiated settlement with Russia. A negotiated settlement is entirely possible. Putin has said so from before the war. He said so during the war. He said so the other night when Tucker Carlson interviewed him. He's never said anything besides he is okay with a negotiated settlement. The longer we wait, the worse the conditions and terms will be for Ukraine, and they will not like it. And I won't even put any sugarcoat on that one. They won't like what it is, but they can still have an independent country on the backside of that. They will have to be a neutral state, but neutral as was the case with Finland all those years. They were neutral, but they still had plenty of defense ties and their own strong national defense. So it's not a submission or a surrender. That's not what's on the table, and they don't need to do that. Ukraine doesn't. They can still have an independent, strong country with their own self-defense force. That's still on the table. That's what can happen. And if Russia gets that, if they get this buffer, this right basically between NATO and themselves, then they can live with that. Putin has made that clear, and it makes sense that he would do that. One last point I want to talk on, because I hear it a lot. They're like, oh, so you're just going to trust Putin? No, I don't trust him as far as I can throw him. And nor should you. I don't trust any leader of any. I don't care if it's Great Britain, Germany, any of these other places here. I care about what they can do and what they're going to do. That's what I care about. And we should work with everybody cooperatively as best we can. And obviously, those are friendly nations, and I love both of them and work with them. But I don't trust their leaders based on what they say. I trust what they do and what they're capable of. That's what we should apply to Vladimir Putin. I don't care what he says too much. We certainly have to listen to it. But what he does and what he can do, what he cannot do, the important point, he cannot launch a war into the West. He doesn't have that capacity. So what he can do is defend his country. He's shown that. So if he doesn't have the capacity to come and attack us, then we don't have to worry about trusting him. We can just see that he doesn't have the ability to do that. Now, if those other Eastern European countries, the eastern flank of NATO, if they're worried about him maybe doing the unthinkable someday, no problem. Then within your national defense capacity, raise your defense spending, raise your military capacity, do more training, bring all those things on that you want to defend yourself against it, because you're the one who's right there on the edge. That's fair. There's nothing wrong with that at all. That's what you should do. That is 100 times better than to continue to poke somebody who has nuclear weapons and just hope that he doesn't really want to use them. That's the very definition of insanity, of risking a war that the other side doesn't even want to fight. They don't want to conquer any territory. They just want to live in security on their border like every other state does. So let's get this war over with, get a negotiated settlement, get the fighting stopped, and get the killing stopped, start the process that's going to be decades long of rebuilding and replenishing the Ukraine side, so that at least they have a future and a hope. That's what we can and should do. And we'll see what ends up happening here. And if our leaders keep going down this bad path, we're going to keep doing what we do here on Daniel Davis Deep Dive and expose that and hold their feet to the fire, so that you, the people whose money they're talking about, are aware of what's happening. And you can make your displeasure known if you should decide to do that. We're going to keep doing that for you. We thank you very much for joining today. Please be sure to like and subscribe and share this so other people know what's really going on, and not just the happy fiction that a lot of these leaders want people to believe. Thanks, and we'll see you next time on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.